And next up, we have the Atlanta Hawks, who were just shy of the playoffs last season. They already had one of, if not the most high octane offense, as they scored about 120 points per game, on the backs of mostly Trae Young, and then their starting center, Steven Adams, had a big role. Um, and then also, other guys like Cam Reddish, DeAndre Hunter, guys who aren't here anymore. The reason being is that they traded DeAndre Hunter, Cam Reddish, a bunch of those guys. They traded them for Nikola Jokic, the superstar big man from the Denver Nuggets. Jokic, obviously, one of the best, if not the best passer at the big man spot today. Just an incredibly skilled player. And he's a huge guy. He's 7 foot, 284 pounds. So for him to have that touch on the ball that he has, whether he's passing it or whether he's going up for a jumper, or even working inside in the post, this guy just has some of the softest hands in the league today. So the main thing that they're getting with Jokic, obviously his court vision and his passing, playmaking ability out of the high post, but he's also a deadly shooter. He can shoot from mid-range, pop an 18, 20 footer, or he can step behind the arc even and take some threes as well. But really, what they want to do with him for the most part is operate in that high or low post action and really just be able to find his teammates. If the double comes, if not, then he's going to go to work and try and score for himself. So really an incredible pickup for the Hawks. And not only that, but they signed Paul George from the Los Angeles Clippers. Paul George opted out of his contract along with Kawhi Leonard. Kawhi ended up staying in Los Angeles. Paul George did not. Paul ended up departing for the Hawks, and at the time seemed like a bit of a confusing move for him, as they hadn't acquired Jokic yet, but Paul George must have knew something was up in Atlanta. Must have knew that they were going after a guy like Jokic, that third star to really tie it all together. So George ended up joining the Atlanta Hawks on a 3-year, $135 million contract with a player option for $49.28 million in 2024. So he is getting a ton of money here to come to Atlanta, and the main concern with that is he's going to be 34 when he's getting that almost 50 million. He's just in the tail end of his prime. He's at 31 years old, but still a tremendous athlete, a 6'8" forward, and really one of the premier defenders in the NBA today. Not only is he an elite defender, but he is also a deadly shooter as well, and he uses his size as well as his ball handling ability to really slash inside and have his way with the defense. So Paul George is one of the premier two-way stars in the league today. So it'll be interesting to see how he meshes with a guy like Trae Young, and then also with a big man like Nikola Jokic, because both of those guys are used to having the ball in their hands the majority of the time. So how is it going to work here with those three guys who are all just used to creating either for themselves or for others? But they all needed the ball in order to do so. So we'll see how that works out for them. But then, of course, returning is Trae Young. Trae Young is developing into a superstar, just 22 years old. He is probably a top three offensive, maybe top three or top five offensive player in the league today. I mean, the numbers that this guy can put up is just absolutely breathtaking. He's a deadly shooter. He can shoot from the logo, 5, 6 feet behind the 3-point line. He's not afraid to shoot it. And not only that, but he is an elite facilitator. He might be the best passer in the NBA today. And he can also use his great ball skills to create shots for himself, whether that be behind the line, in the mid range, or even slashing to the cup. So Trae Young, even though he's a defensive liability at this point, the acquisition of Paul George really helps him out there on that end of the floor. They might be able to try and hide him a little bit, but really, just an outstanding big three for the Hawks. They look to be very formidable heading into next season, as they look to really come out of the Eastern Conference. They didn't make the playoffs last year, but it's almost guaranteed that they'll make it this season, and once they do, they should definitely be one of the biggest players in the Eastern Conference, along with teams like the Miami Heat, the Philadelphia 76ers, and the Boston Celtics, and even the Toronto Raptors. So there's a lot of competition out east, and Atlanta really stepped up to the plate and delivered with those three guys. But then rounding out the starting lineup, they also have Davis Bertans. Bertans is a deadly shooter from deep. Really not much more than that. He knows his role though, and he plays it well, and that is be ready for any kick out options. And when you have a big three like Jokic, George, and Young, those opportunities are going to be coming aplenty for Bertans. So he could be looking at a career year for himself. You see in 2019 and 2020 and in 3&D Season 1, he put up 11.5 points per game along with 6 boards, while shooting 45.5% from the floor, 42.5% from 3, and then 92% from the free throw line. His numbers dipped a little bit last season due to a reduced role in Atlanta. But I imagine he could be a starter for Atlanta this season. He's really a perfect fit next to a guy like Jokic due to his shooting ability, and then even Paul George as well. Paul George will really help him out on that defensive end. But the main concern there is hopefully they don't load up that starting lineup with too many guys that can't defend. You already have Trae Young and Davis Bertans, who are both liabilities on that end of the floor. And even Jokic, while he's a decent team defender at that 5 spot, he's not quite the rim protector and paint protector that so many teams value out of their starting 5. Guys like Joel Embiid, Rudy Gobert, Rashawn Holmes, Bam Adebayo. All of those guys are tremendous paint protectors. Jokic isn't that. Jokic is a little bit more complicated, with him being just an absolute stud offensively. It'll be interesting to see how that defense works out, because they have probably the best offensive group of guys in the league right now, but defensively will leave a bit to be desired there. So in hopes to spell Jokic, they do bring back Nerlens Noel. Nerlens is at he has 2 years left on his contract at $35 million, getting $17 million this year and almost $18 million next year. And Noel is just he's a premier shot blocker, great athlete at 6'10", 220 pounds, not as strong as you would want him to be out of a 5. That might be why they ended up going for Jokic. I mean, if you have the opportunity to get Jokic, you do it. But Noel is going to bring tremendous defense off of the bench, as well as some decent rebounding at that backup 5 spot. He can't really play next to Jokic. I think there would be too many concerns about the perimeter defense, as well as some spacing issues, if there were to be the 4 and the 5. So I imagine Noel will just be spelling Jokic, but he's one of the best backup big men in the NBA today. Atlanta also adds Carmelo Anthony, the 37-year-old vet out of Syracuse. He's heading into his ninth season in the NBA, and really he's bounced around the past 4 or 5 years. You remember him being an absolute star in Denver, and kept that going in New York as he started to wind down a little bit, and then he went to OKC, the failed trio of Westbrook, Paul George, and Carmelo Anthony, where Anthony really became that scapegoat after their first round exit to the Jazz in 2018. And then he went to Houston, didn't really work out there. Went to Portland, didn't really do a whole lot. Went to Milwaukee after that last season and had a decent year, especially shooting the three ball, as you can see, at 38.6%. So Carmelo's looking to kind of have a career renaissance at 37 years old. Um, he's not nearly the player that he once was, that's obvious. But what they can expect out of him is a good veteran off of the bench for them, a good leader, and just a guy that if you're, in a 10-2 run, the other team's on a 10-2 run against you, this is the kind of guy that you just give him the ball, let him ISO, and let him try and get either to the line or get a bucket to try and break that momentum a little bit. So Melo, he could be a pretty solid pickup for the Hawks, but we'll see if his age catches up to him and if he can't get his career back on track here before he winds down. And then Atlanta also picked up Pat Connaughton. Connaughton joined the Hawks last season, shot 53% from the floor, 49% from three, and then just 65% from the free throw line. But what you love about Connaughton is his athleticism and his tremendous shooting ability. Obviously, one of the elite marksmen last season at 49.2% from deep. He could have a bit more of an extended role this season off of that strong performance shooting the ball, especially if a guy like Bertans ends up struggling again this season. A guy like Connaughton can really step in and provide a lot off of the bench for this Hawks team. He's also a pretty good defender in his own right. So he could have a pretty solid role with them. Rounding out their bench, you have Eric Gordon. Gordon is on a very, very tough contract here. The Nuggets had to include him with the Jokic deal, just so that they could try and offload him because he's getting 3 years, $58.71 million. And, he's 32, so there's still some time left for him to get back to that sixth man of the year type of guy. But that window is definitely closing for him. He's not going to be putting up 18, 16 points a game anymore. But if he can get to about, 11, 12 points a game off the bench, that contract starts to look a little bit more passable, and they might be able to flip him for a second rounder or something like that. Next, we have Sterling Brown. Brown is returning with the Hawks this season. Didn't really see a whole lot of playing time last year, but he is getting 3.25 million this season, and he's a pretty solid 3-and-D guy. So he could end up carving a role for himself as well on this Hawks team, which really needs some strong defenders, and Sterling Brown can really provide that for them. And then we also have Josh Christopher taken with the 13th pick of this draft. He was taken just before Maker, and he fits need a lot more than Maker. And even then, Maker is in Denver now, so it's all a moot point. But Christopher, he can provide some timely shot making for this Hawks team off of the bench. And then even if they love him, they could even start him at that two guard spot. They do need a starting two guard, and really it's up to Pat Connaughton, Eric Gordon, or Josh Christopher really to fill that role. So it'll be interesting to see who Atlanta goes with there. And then finally they have Bruno Fernando, the big man out of Maryland, heading into his third season in the NBA. He's been a pretty reliable reserve big man, not flashy, just comes in, does his job. He's a pretty solid defender, and he still has some room to grow. He's only 22 years old, so we'll see what happens with him. And then finally, Michael Kidd Gilchrist. MKG never lived up to that second overall pick in 2012, and really he didn't see much, if any, playing time last season for the Hawks. He had spent his entire career with Charlotte up until last season. Um, and he's on a 1 year $5 million deal with a player option for $5 million next year. So hopefully they can get him some more minutes just to at least justify that contract. Um, but yeah, Atlanta, hopefully they can get back into the playoffs. They fell just short. They were the ninth seed last season, just barely losing out to the Brooklyn Nets. But when you have a big three like Jokic, Paul George, and Trae Young, the expectation isn't just playoffs, it's competing for championships. So Atlanta, they're going to have their work cut out for them. They still might make a few moves during the season to try and shore up that two spot as well as that power forward position, in the case that Bertans struggles, or if one of Connaughton, Gordon, or Josh Christopher really aren't able to step up and be that starting level two guard for them. They could definitely be in the market for either of those positions moving forward. But as it stands now, this is still a very strong team, just on the backs of that big three. And finally, rounding out the Southeast Division after a long breakdown, we have the returning one seed Miami Heat. Miami had a very strong year last year. They went 20-9, which earned them the first seed in the Eastern Conference. I believe they ended up making it to the Eastern Conference Finals, where they fell just short to the Philadelphia 76ers, the eventual NBA champions. So Miami was looking to add a little bit more firepower this offseason. But what they ended up doing instead was adding an entire fucking army. They have Giannis Antetokounmpo now joining the reigning MVP Bam Adebayo, and they're flanked by stellar talent. They still have Jimmy Butler, who's still on a 1 year $36 million contract with a player option for $37.65 million next year. And then they also still have Tyler Herro. They got Bruce Brown, excuse me. They bring back KZ Okpala. They bring back Kyle Lowry, Duncan Robinson, added Paul Millsap. Just this team is just loaded with talent. So the story of Giannis Antetokounmpo ending up in South Beach is quite the crazy one. The management with the Heat were very confident in landing Giannis this past offseason. So confident that they pretty much called their shot the past few years, saying we're going after Giannis, we're going to get Giannis, we're going to try and pry him away from Milwaukee and build a dynasty in Miami once again. So it's very reminiscent to LeBron coming to South Beach from Cleveland. Giannis, he leaves a pretty strong supporting cast in Milwaukee behind to join the Heat, but it's almost assuredly worth it because, again, he has a reigning MVP next to him now in Bam Adebayo, as well as just an incredible player and probably the best glue guy in the game in Jimmy Butler. So let's look at Giannis. Giannis had a very strong year last year, put up 28.9 points, 13.4 rebounds, and 3.5 assists last season. So his assist numbers were down. The Bucks really struggled to find a footing in the Eastern Conference, and they fell out of the playoff race. Despite Giannis really improving his offensive repertoire, he became a elite 3-point shooter, shot 38.4% last season from behind the arc on 138 attempts in 29 games. So Giannis, he decided, hey man, we can't really build a team in Milwaukee if I were to get paid there and they're still paying Chris Middleton, still paying Eric Bledsoe, still paying Brook Lopez, guys like that. So he managed to find a way to South Beach. He did receive a ton of offers. He was definitely the most sought after free agent in recent memory. He was very close to signing with the Philadelphia 76ers to join Joel Embiid and Ben Simmons in Philly. And then he was also close to signing with the Utah Jazz to join Donovan Mitchell in Salt Lake City. In fact, he was very enticed with the Jazz's offer, which during their meeting, Quinn Snyder took Giannis out for a second, and really just kind of confused Giannis, which might have really made Giannis reluctant to sign with the Jazz and actually put pen to paper with them. But all in all, they had a great time, and Giannis was, at the time, he was likely headed to Utah until Philadelphia put in that offer for him and really won him over. Miami, they were always just lurking in the shadows, very quiet, which, you don't really expect out of a team like South Beach. You'd think that their recruiting would be very aggressive, with um, the very enticing appeal of South Beach, but they really didn't. They really didn't do that. They were, like I said, lurking from the shadows, just kind of biding time and waiting and seeing what Giannis was doing. And Giannis eventually just picked South Beach. He wanted to join up with the reigning MVP Bam Adebayo. So Giannis, he's 26, entering his ninth season in the NBA. He was the former 15th overall pick in the 2013 draft and really just shattered expectations. Pretty much became a superstar overnight between the 2016 and 2017 season. So Giannis, I mean, he adds a lot to this team. He is definitely the most well-rounded player in the NBA, especially now that he has added that three-point shot to his arsenal. I mean, the guy is an athletic monster. He's 6'11", 240. Very long wingspan, great skill set with the ball, and really one of the best defenders in the league today. He's a perennial defensive player of the year caliber guy, a walking triple double. Like, this guy is just a monster. So to see him land in South Beach along with Bam Adebayo is very, very scary. So speaking of Bam Adebayo, he did sign a 5-year max deal in restricted free agency to come back to the Heat as expected. He had a breakout season last year, winning MVP honors as he put up almost 21 points a game, 13 and a half boards, and then 7 assists a game as well, along with 2 steals and 1.5 blocks. This guy was really all over the place. There wasn't a single play where he wasn't involved, it felt like. Bam is really just one of the true young stars in this league. And with him winning an MVP at the age of 23, that's pretty incredible. So hopefully Bam can keep adding to his game. His jumper still needs some work. But he does have good form on it, so he could definitely add a three ball to his arsenal. If this guy becomes a 35% shooter or better from deep, this team is going to be nearly impossible to stop on offense. And then defensively, they just have absolute hounds, man. They have Giannis, they have Bam Adebayo, but then they also have Jimmy Butler. Jimmy Butler is 31, heading into his 11th year in the league. His offensive numbers aren't quite what they used to, as he's starting to fall off a little bit on that end of the floor. But he makes his money defensively. This guy is a defensive leader. He was the defensive leader for Miami last season. Bam gets a ton of the credit, but Jimmy Butler is just the bona fide leader for this Miami squad. He's a great veteran, 31 years old, been around for a while now, and he really spearheads that defense. And he'll probably take challenging the most challenging matchup defensively every single night now that Giannis is in town. Because really, Jimmy's not going to be relied upon that much anymore as a scorer. I could see him averaging maybe a little less than his 12 and a half points a game, maybe a little more if his shooting percentages go up. You see, he only shot 29% from three last year when he is a career 34% three-point shooter. So if he gets that three ball going again, he could be back up into about 14, 15 points a game. And still, he is just an absolute incredible two-way player for the Miami Heat. Really rounds out that big three well because of how balanced he is as a player. But then also coming back, they have Tyler Hero, whatever. So Tyler is he's a 19 point per game scorer, shooting 43% from the floor and 42% from the 3-point line last year. He really came into his own off the bench as a bona fide scorer. He was in the sixth man of the year race along with Julius Randle and his own teammate Kendrick Nunn, but he ended up falling short as Randle got the award. But this guy is one of the best shot creators in the NBA. Pretty decent athlete for his size at 6'5", but the main thing with him is just absolutely efficient skill set for him. So he is still on his rookie scale contract as he enters his third year. He's just 21 years old, guys. This guy is just crazy young still. He's making $4 million this year and then $5.72 million next season. So they still have very high hopes for Tyler. He could end up being a starter for them, potentially, unless they really want that scoring punch off of the bench again. So joining Miami this offseason on a pretty large deal is Bruce Brown. Brown joined via restricted free agency. Miami offered him a 4-year, $80 million contract, and Detroit just really wasn't able to match that, as they had plans to bring in Jaylen Brown, as well as Bojan Bogdanovic and Robert Williams. But so Bruce Brown really he doesn't put up the raw numbers that you would expect for a guy of his salary, but he's a tremendous defender, really smart defender, uses his defensive instincts well along the perimeter, and then he's a pretty solid three-point shooter as well. He shot 41.3% from three last year, and 51% from the floor, so he's a pretty efficient role player. He could be a starter for them either at the 1 or the 2 spot, and he would really round out that starting lineup well for them. Next we have KZ Okpala. KZ is a third-year player, really came into his own last season as a bench as a bench forward. He's kind of a tweener, not really a three, not really a four, but he can play either spot. And this guy, he's another 3 and D level guy. He shot 36% from three last year, and he's just another guy that is an absolute dog on defense. And that's the main thing that you will notice with this Miami Heat team is they have some dogs on defense, man. These guys are going to be hounding guys. They might win some games fucking 90 to 65 this season because of how good their defense is going to be. So Miami just really loaded on that end of the floor, and they have the shooters necessary to surround Giannis Antetokounmpo, Bam Adebayo, and Jimmy Butler on the offensive end. Also returning to the Heat is veteran point guard Kyle Lowry. Lowry signed a one-year, $10.5 million deal to come back to the Heat after he was traded from the Cleveland Cavaliers to Miami midway through last season. He had a pretty efficient season last year, shooting 44.5% from the field, 42.5% from three, and then almost 90% from the free throw line. He only put up about 10.5 points a game. His minutes per game really dropped down from 32.5 down to 21.5. So he's really not getting the playing time that he had been used to, but he's making the most of the minutes that he does get. He's a great veteran point guard. He could be in a starting role for them, or he could even run the bench unit as well. But they really value his locker room presence in Miami. Just another leader to pair with a guy like Jimmy Butler. And then even Paul Millsap, who they picked up. Millsap is 36, heading into his 16th season. Really has had two down years the past 2 years. Denver, he was still pretty efficient, shooting 51 and then almost 40% from three, but only 7 points a game and 6 rebounds a game. He went to New York, shot the ball significantly worse, but put up better raw numbers from the floor. From the floor, excuse me. But Paul Millsap, he's a great, just a great veteran for a team like Miami. Still a solid defender inside, and a pretty good three-point shooter if he's feeling on. Last season, his three-point shot dipped down to about 27%. So you hope that improves for him moving forward as he starts to enter the twilight years of his career. He just signed a one-year, $5.7 million deal, which is a pretty good bargain for a player of his caliber. And then returning to the Heat is stud marksman Duncan Robinson. Robinson, he could also be starting at that two-guard spot. He started for Miami last season, actually the past 2 seasons, I believe, and is really just one of the elite marksmen in the NBA today. He shot 37% from three last year, but on a significant amount of three-point shots. This guy might be the highest volume three-point shooter in the league right now, right up there with guys like Steph Curry, Dame Lillard. This guy, he has one role, and that's come in and shoot the fucking ball. He can play some defense, not quite the defender that you would want him to be as a full-time starter, but his shooting definitely makes up for that defense. So they get him back on a bargain of a deal. He gets 3 years, $23.62 million guaranteed, and then he has a player option in his 4th season at $8.56 million when he will be 30 years old. So he could opt out there and try and go for a bigger payday. But he's still just 27 years old, just about to enter the prime of his playing career. And then rounding out the Miami bench, we have N'Faly Dante. Dante is a 19-year-old big man out of Oregon, drafted with the 26th overall pick last year. Really didn't get a whole lot of playing time last year, just 11 minutes a game in some spot games as well. I don't think he only played in 19 games last season, but what he showed was the potential to be an elite rebounder. You look at his per 36 numbers, just about 16 boards a game. That would put him right up there with the likes of Rudy Gobert, who led the league in rebounding last season at 15.9. Obviously, you take that with a grain of salt, as per 36 numbers are a little bit flawed there. They can definitely inflate some numbers and don't take into account, a loss of stamina, energy, anything like that. But he has the potential to come in and be an elite rebounder and a great backup center for Bam Adebayo at that 5 spot. And then also they have Jalen Leck coming back. He was an undrafted guy, played with Phoenix in his rookie season, and then jumped ship to Miami, where he really, again, didn't see a whole lot of playing time, but he showed some promise in shooting the ball. He shot just 2 for 3 from the 3-point line in 5 games. But again, this guy is he's a stud athlete. He's really been working on that 3-point shot. Really wasn't known for it coming out of the draft. So he's really been working on it, and hopefully that consistency comes along with it, because he could be a tremendous piece for them in the long term. He's just 21 years old and has a ton of athleticism in his game. And then finally we have Devin Vassell, undrafted guy. He'll be in his second year here. Micah Peavy, also another undrafted guy. Kostas Antetokounmpo, Giannis's little brother. Giannis ended up requesting Kostas to come Miami with him. He said he wouldn't sign with Miami unless he got his little brother Kostas to join the Heat as well. Really, there's not much to Kostas's game. Just another stud athlete out of the Antetokounmpo family, 6'10", 200 pounds. He's entering his third season. He was picked with the last pick of 2018 in the draft. And really, the main thing here is just there's a potential that he could become a decent role player at the 5 spot. But it's pretty unlikely that it will happen, but we'll see. And then finally, Malachi Flynn, another undrafted rookie. And that's the main thing that you'll notice with this Heat squad as they rounded out their bench with a bunch of undrafted guys. They're really hoping to find another diamond in the rough, like they did with Kendrick Nunn, who they ended up losing in free agency to the Dallas Mavericks on a absolutely bonkers contract. So while they lose Kendrick Nunn, obviously what they get back in Giannis Antetokounmpo, and then even Bruce Brown, who's really one of the more underrated players in the league today. He's a tremendous defender at that 2-guard spot, and he can even play some point guard in some lineups. If you have a guy like Jimmy Butler or Giannis Antetokounmpo or even Tyler Herro out there who can run the majority of the offense in their hands, Bruce Brown is a great fit for this squad and can really play a number of roles for them in different lineups. So obviously, the gain of Giannis Antetokounmpo is just absolutely incredible from an impact perspective. So they have one of the best starting lineups in the league just by virtue of having Antetokounmpo and then reigning MVP Bam Adebayo on the squad. But then you also have a guy like Jimmy Butler, who's just a standout glue guy, one of the best glue guys in the league. And then Tyler Herro, and then whichever other guard they want to throw in there, whether it be Duncan Robinson, Kyle Lowry, Bruce Brown. KZ Okpala could play a huge role for this team. Even Paul Millsap can play a strong role as well. So they have some options as far as their lineups go. And this is going to be a team that is going to be absolutely a nightmare to try and handle. especially offensively because of how good they are on the defensive end. It's going to be hard to really get easy buckets against this team. They're going to make you work all 48 minutes, no matter who's on the floor. They just have a wealth of defenders to throw at you, and then they have two of the best rim protectors in the league in that front court, in Giannis Antetokounmpo and Bam Adebayo. So that does it for the Southwest Division. Obviously, a lot of talent in this division as well, with Giannis joining the Miami Heat, along with Bam Adebayo and Jimmy Butler. And then All-Star Game MVP Devonte Graham looks to be making a huge name for himself this season as he continues to grow and develop into possibly that Kemba Walker type of guy where he's just an elite scorer at the one guard, really putting his team on his back. Also, you have Jonathan Isaac, one of the best two-way stars in the league. Nikola Vucevic, one of the best offensive centers in the league. You have Brad Beal, who is just an absolute offensive monster. John Wall, who, if he gets back into form, can really make an impact for that Wizard squad. And then finally, you have the Atlanta Hawks, who ended up creating that big three. To go along with Trae Young, they brought in Nikola Jokic and Paul George. So this division is going to be incredibly tough. I could see potentially three playoff teams, maybe four playoff teams in this division if the cards fall right. But it'll be fun to see unfold because there's a lot of star power in this division, and then even a very team-oriented, system-oriented team in Charlotte, as well as the potential youth movement of Washington. It just makes this division a very intriguing division to uh, to watch, really, to watch unfold. So hopefully the Miami Heat and the Atlanta Hawks, hopefully they don't have any issues integrating their new superstars. And then you also hope that the other three teams, the Orlando Magic, the Charlotte Hornets, and the Washington Wizards, can all keep growing and developing as they try to push for that playoff spot. So that does it for the Southeastern Division, guys. Thank you all for listening. I really do appreciate it. We'll be hitting up the Central Division next, and then wrap things up with our season preview with the Atlantic Division, where we will take a look at the NBA champion Philadelphia 76ers. So stay tuned for that. But that's all for the Southeast. Thank you, and have a good one, guys. Later.